I'm Peter Slavovsky, and David Vargo is a good friend. We developed a good friendship about 7-8 years ago, and have maintained that friendship. But he had asked me to share something out of my life, and in particular, I'd like to just share how God has worked in me and my wife when our son was born, our son Mark Slavovsky. At 5 days old, he contracted what was found out to be bacterial meningitis. He became very ill, very high temperature. I happened to be working at our church doing a service project when the phone rang, and my wife said, "Peter, you need to come home right away. Mark is burning up with a very high fever." We rushed him to the hospital. This was a Saturday morning, and after several hours of waiting in the waiting room, 2 doctors came to us and basically clarified what was going on with Mark. Specifically, that he did contract bacterial meningitis, not very clear as to from where and why. At that young age, they have their natural immunity, but he succumbed to it. And they proceeded to tell us what the possible consequence was, depending how far the bacteria had penetrated up his spine and up to his brain. And so, of course, we were very anxious about what we had heard and what the results could be, that he could, in his life, show severe symptoms resulting from this. Well, this was Saturday. They took several spinal taps to determine what the bacteria specifically was. While waiting, they gave him a general antibiotic and to hold him over. And Monday was the date that they said they would understand what the bacteria is and give him a more specific antibiotic. Well, I decided to go ahead and go to work. We lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and 1 block from our house, this was my pattern. I would just walk that block to a main avenue where I would hitchhike. We don't hitchhike anymore, but back then I used to hitchhike, and I hitchhiked at that point for as much as a year. That day, a car stopped, and I jumped in the back seat because there was a man driving and a woman next to him. And as the car was pulling away, the lady turned back and asked how my weekend was. And I mean, as tense as I was that morning, I did explain to them that our son was in a hospital and we did not know whether he would make it or not. At which point she just turned to look at the book on her lap, which happened to be a Bible. First time in a year that I stepped in a car with somebody with a Bible. And turned to John chapter 9 and read the story of the blind man. Jesus was asked by his disciples, why is it that this man was blind? Was it because of his father's sin or his mother's sin? And Jesus' reply was, no, none of these, but that the glory of God might be revealed through him. And right about that time, I said, this is where I need to get off. It was only 2 miles down where I worked. And I jumped out and thanked them for the ride and ran across the street to the building that I was at, all the way to the 9th floor of our 10-story building. And I just was totally relaxed and started whistling out of joy from what I had heard. And my first action after I turned on the lights in my office was to give the hospital a call. And the lady that answered was the head nurse of the department. And her words very quickly were, Mr. Slavovsky, we don't understand it, but his cultures are totally negative, and he seems to be fine. And I just responded by saying, ma'am, I think I understand. So at lunchtime, I got a ride to the hospital, and Mark, our son, was totally alive with great movement. Last I had seen him, he looked like a wet washcloth. Here he was just as jubilant as could be. And we were not totally surprised because we saw the hand of God in what had happened. We had our entire church praying the day before for a miracle that God would touch his body, his life, and here was the result. And so they kept him another day at their request, and we came back, and one of the two doctors that had spoken to us on Saturday came into the room and said, well, we don't have the full explanation of what happened, but this is what could be the result of the trauma that he went through, and that is that he would be a very slow learner in his life and may show some symptoms in spite of the fact that he did not show any effect from a bacteria. Well, Mark is now 41 years old and is a professor at Covenant College. He had nothing but excellent grades in elementary, middle, high school, and in college. Almost a full scholarship got him through. Has his accounting degree through the business school at Covenant, and 4 years ago Covenant hired him to be a professor, to take over the job of a retiring professor there. So God gets the glory, but what it did for me and my wife is to come to a better understanding of the grace of God, and that God is in the miracle business, that he is mindful of us and that he loves us. And although everybody has a different story with regard to their lives, this was Mark's story and how God used Mark in our lives. And we just give God the glory. Thank you.